A Sacrifice of Shadows by J.C. Lovero. Our last sheep collapsed in midnight. Please, I whispered. There was a distinct chill in the night air, void of the ambient ether I'd grown accustomed to back in Eden. With a deep breath, I found my center, resting my now steady hands over the sheep's heart, pulling strength from within. My palms glowed a dim, golden light, but his labored breathing and weak pulse remained. He was the youngest of his flock, with eyes like twin suns and fleece spun of silver moonlight, the strongest of his siblings, and the least ill-tempered. I wiped at my gummy eyelids and covered him with a blanket to keep him comfortable. By morning, he'd be like the rest of the animals, in a cocoon. None of us understood what was happening, but we called it the stigma. The first hint was blood, followed by lack of hunger, eventually starved of nourishment. Their bodies stopped working, then they collapsed. By dawn, it covered them in cocoons spun of silk. Would they emerge as butterflies, like caterpillars do, or something else? A broken bar. Footsteps from behind broke me from my reverie, the familiar feel of Evan's arm wrapped around my shoulders, and I slumped into him. "Don't overdo it," he said. His gray eyes pierced into me, intense and steadfast. I shook my head. "We're too far from Eden. I have Toa. Stop stripping yourself dry, Adam. You're no good to us dead. It's only a matter of time." Evan pulled me into him and brushed his chin against my cheek. "You don't know that." Almost always, Evan's soul flowed with mine, as if we shared the same ether. But tonight and in his moments of mischief his heart skipped a beat. "Maybe this is how all animals eventually die," Evan had said the first time, but something within me knew better. "We need to return to Eden." Evan stiffened. Father creates plagues all the time. He'll know how to stop it, and what if he's the one causing it? We won't know unless we go." I took his hand in mine and squeezed it. "We're out of options," Evan sighed, then peeled his body from the damp grass. "I need to finish the stables. See you back at the cottage." The full moon radiated dim, silver light onto the panting sheep. He came into this world under nightfall, only to be taken away the same. I pulled my knees into my chest and stifled a sob while I watched him die. A copyright, a copyright, a copyright. All night, the sight of the sheep's silhouette outlined in silken strands illuminated my mind. I sat by the window while I sipped on hot tea, gazing over the mountain slopes. We found a small village of humans years ago, complete with thatched roofs, puffs of smoke that trickled out of chimneys, chickens that scratched on the dirt and grass, and sheep that bayed. Coming from Eden, the villagers proclaimed me as the Son of God, whatever that meant, and for a long while, we lived happily, without a care in the world except the simple pleasures of life. Wake up in the morning, tend to the animals, teach the village children how to survive in the wilderness, and repeat. A stark difference from living in Eden, where everything we ever needed was readily available. But I didn't mind the work, because Evan and I had each other. Evan rolled over in the bed and snored. I smiled into my cup as I took another sip. Then a coughing frenzy overcame me. The mug thudded on the floor, and I turned my face into my shoulder to soften the noise. Evan pushed himself up onto his elbows with one eye half open. "You okay?" I nodded into my tunic and waved a hand at him. "I'm fine, go back to sleep." He patted the space beside him. "Come to bed, it's still dark outside." I stood from the chair and picked up the mug from the floor. After I wiped up the tea with a rag, I straightened my shirt. A heaviness settled onto my chest, the red stains on the white linen. The first hint was blood. "Adam," my breath caught, and I turned away. Facing the window, I crossed my arms. Evan closed the gap between us, then wrapped a blanket around me. Cold, warmth flushed through my core when Evan fixed his steely gray stare upon me. Tall and darkly handsome, he hugged me and pressed a soft kiss on my forehead. The room tilted as 100 butterflies fluttered from within my stomach, but it was short-lived, replaced by a chill that crawled down the length of my spine. Even a broken bar. My mouth dried up as the words hid in the darkness. He brought his hand to my face, tracing the back of his fingers over the edge of my jaw. "What's wrong?" Before I could respond, a tap sounded at the door, then swung open to reveal Kano. "Son of God," he said, his eyes feverish. "What is it?" I asked. Evan frowned. "Did the children eat the rotten apples from the harvest?" I told Ama. "Number." Kano shook his head. "It's Abel, he's sick." I slung a satchel of herbs over my shoulder to cover the stain on my tunic. The sky was still dark with night, the sun not even a sliver over the horizon. Kano and his brother Abel shared the largest cottage, a hunter and a farmer. They were the de facto leaders and primary providers when we arrived as exiles of Eden. Their home was lit inside with golden ever-flame lanterns, the walls dancing with hues of orange mixed with flickering shadows. Abel laid in a corner bed, his eyes closed and his breaths shallow. I placed a hand on his forehead to feel for a fever while palpating for a pulse. "When did this happen?" Evan asked. "Just this morning, as I was waking him to tend to the crops," Kano said. His brows furrowed, he wouldn't move. "Any symptoms?" I asked with my ear to Abel's chest. "A bit of coughing, but nothing that seemed extraordinary." Kano scratched his chin. "Though I had to force him to eat his dinner for days, eventually starved of nourishment, their bodies stopped working." I stared at Evan for a long moment, meeting his gaze without flinching. He must have read the truth in my eyes. The stigma infected the humans. "Do something," Kano demanded. Gathering all my strength, I harnessed the ether within me, pulling deeply on the feeling I'd been able to reach before. Golden light radiated from my palms as they passed over Abel's body, then stuttered before fading away. I closed my eyes, searching for the power I knew dwelt inside, just barely out of grasp. For a moment, I thought I touched it. I opened my eyes, and a golden spark shot from my hand before sizzling against Abel's skin. My heart squeezed knowing that had been waiting for me. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "No," Kano said, his voice stern. "You've always been able to cure illness before, why not now?" "This is different," Evan said flatly. An owl hooted in the distance as the silence stretched between us. Kano's stare landed on me, full of questions, until there were none. "Are you saying a broken bar?" We went silent, and the chill of the early morning swirled about us. Birds called softly as the sun rose. I pushed myself to my feet, fighting against the sting between my eyes at the reality of what was happening. But before I could move past the door, an arm closed around me and the blade of a dagger was at my throat. "Kano!" Evan shouted. A rage unlike any I've ever seen twisted his handsome face. Waves of shadow radiated off him, undulating with slivers of morning light. "Let him go," he growled. Kano's dagger scratched my skin. "What use is the Son of God if not for making miracles? Adam's tried already, didn't you see? Then try harder." "That's Noda." Kano yanked me tighter, and his blade bit into my throat. Blood dripped down his arm, trickling to the ground in a slow, uneven pitter-patter. "Quiet," Kano snarled. "If you can't help him, take us to the Father." Evan always argued his way out of it whenever I brought up the idea of returning to Eden. His prejudice clouded his judgment, even after all these years. But we were no longer dealing with rabbits, goats, and sheep. If anyone could fix this, it was my father. "Don't take another step closer," Kano shouted as Evan moved. "I know you won't dare to risk the life of your precious Adam." Evan clenched his hands into fists. "You wouldn't. No one else knows the way through the Fade." "All right," I said. Evan's eyes shifted onto me, wide like twin eclipses over two gray moons. We held each other by gaze alone as my heart threatened to rip itself from my chest. "I'm sorry," I wanted to say. Kano loosened his grip on my neck. "Let's go for a walk." A copyright, a copyright, a copyright. Thick and gnarled redwood trees ran down from the foot of the great mountain and into the enchanted forest. Along the slithering path, cocoons of various sizes rested on the earth: squirrels, chipmunks, rabbits, wolves. The stigma would not discriminate, choosing 2 of us as its latest victims. Kano pulled the wagon down the road that led to the Fadia, the split between the human world and the Garden of Eden. Abel was cocooned in a silken prison, trapped, but perhaps not dead, just like the animals. The sun's warmth reminded me of our sheep. My breath slowed as memories trickled back to when we played in the fields and along the river on sunny days. I fought the desire to rest, knowing that so many lives depended on our journey home. "You all right?" Evan asked. "Of course. You ate little when we stopped to camp last night." "I've got a lot on my mind." "Your father?" I closed my eyes. Maybe it was the uncertainty of what was happening to us, shaking something loose inside of me. Leaves crunched under my boots, each step bringing us closer to the fade. I sensed power dormant returning as currents of ambient ether intensified. I wondered if Evan felt the magic growing stronger, too. "Adam," the second I opened my eyes, I burned with invisible flames. Something overcame me, scraping me raw as I barreled to the floor. My vision tunneled and blurred, and bile gathered in my throat as my head spun. 1,000 tiny daggers dug underneath my flesh, preventing me from moving. Then they collapsed. "Adam." Evan scooped me into his lap, his brows drawn together, herbs and poultices scattered on the ground beside us. Evan's gaze flickered to the bloody spot of my tunic, realization setting in as his shoulders slumped over me. "Oh, no you don't." Kano drew his sword from its scabbard. The crystalline blade rang out and pierced the silence as he advanced from the wagon. "We keep moving, or else yeah." Evan clenched his fist, harnessing the ether from the surrounding air. The rage from before returned, and the pupils of his eyes shifted to black. His neck snapped to look at Kano, then dark tendrils erupted from the earth. They enclosed around him, slithering across his body like a nest of hungry snakes. Hissing, wisps of shadowy smoke restrained Kano's arms, legs, and torso, suspending him several feet above the ground. "I could kill you," Evan said, his voice grim with a sharp edge. "Give me one good reason." Kano opened his mouth, but dark strands twisted over his throat and squeezed tighter. With my remaining strength, I raised my hand and touched Evan's face. His icy gaze settled on my bones with a chill spreading across me. Not unfamiliar, but also not unwelcome. Evan's eyes shifted from black to gray, and he exhaled. "You're right, but we're leaving them. They'll slow us down." 2 powerful arms lifted me up from the ground, and suddenly the world tilted as Evan ran. Bile rose in my throat and splattered all over me. It was the first taste I remembered after collapsing, followed by the sound of Evan cursing and the scent of sandalwood across his chest. "Adam, stay with me." I could not oblige. The universe faded to a cold blackness, and I slipped away with no pain. A copyright, a copyright, a copyright. I blinked, emerging from strange dreams of moonlight and shadows. A campfire burned nearby. A slimy fluid seeped from my skin, slick with sweat. It was as if my body was trying to expunge the uncomfortable tingle of an itch I couldn't scratch. "You're awake." Evan was at my side with one arm wrapped around my back. He leaned forward and tucked the other underneath my knees. My stomach sank as he hoisted me up, legs covered in silken thread. I stared up at him. He turned his gaze to mine, and neither of us said anything. Heat flushed my cheeks, and I couldn't blame it entirely on the stigma. Unease curled through me as I blinked again, trying to clear the haze of sleep from my head. Shouts filtered from outside. "What's going on?" Evan gestured beyond the translucent barrier of the fade. "When you passed out, I just ran without stopping." The cocoons a broken bar their opening. My breath hitched. The bodies of angels, skin as bright as sunlight, horns and sharp angles, paired with gossamer wings that spanned unnaturally from their backs. They attacked anything in sight, and the taste of acid burned my throat as I swallowed it down. A broken bar don't understand. Willie a question mark. Number. Evan stiffened at the idea. Show me where to go. The silence swelled between us. It would take days to cross the Fade and into Eden, and what if my father couldn't fix this, or maybe Evan was right, by morning, I'd be like the rest of them, in a cocoon. I studied the lines of Evan's face, committing them to my memory as I cradled his cheek in my hand. He regarded me steadily, his dark gaze as solemn as it was tender. A chuckle broke my concentration. My, two princes of God, how a broken bar futuristic of him. Who are you? Shadows swirled around us as Evan tapped into the unstable ether of the Fade. The muscles of his chest tensed against me. Oh, forgive my manners. When you've spent the last millennia with angels, you forget the social niceties of humans. My name is Ma Urigan. Evan tilted his head. Angels? What do you want? I asked. I thought it was obvious. She gestured at my legs, bound in silken thread, now up to my thighs. I'm here to help you, of course. My pulse quickened. You know how to cure the stigma? Oh, dear Number. Ma Urigan chuckled. The stigma is unknown to this world, even out of your father's league. He wouldn't know where to begin. Freezing cold wormed through my bones, and I inhaled a deep breath to dispel it. I stamped out the surge of disappointment welling up inside of me. Don't frown, Evan boy. I have a way to protect your dear Adam. Ma Urigan snapped her fingers. Massive wings flared out from behind her. Feathers exploded, then fell like snow, lazy and slow in fat clumps that gathered along every nook and bump of the surrounding trees. Her smiley the face of 1,000 nightmares and dreams. No attempts at flattery? She asked. You seem to have a high enough opinion of yourself already, Evan said. Suit yourself. I'd say you have about 2 minutes before the sun rises. Ma Urigan gestured at my body, and the threads had moved up to my torso. Evan's eyes darkened. What can you do? She summoned a single feather into her palm and blew it. I followed the sparkles until it hovered in the space above my heart. Quid pro quo. I stopped the stigma from consuming Adam, but in exchange, one of you promises to give me broken bar. Ma Urigan scratched at her chin, then her eyes lit up. Your most prized possession. What does that mean? I asked. It means what it means, nothing more, nothing less. Evan's expression remained unreadable, but I detected a slight hardening along the firm line of his jaw. No, I squeezed Evan's shoulders. Absolutely not. We don't have a choice. Tick-tock, boys, she said with a chuckle. Deal, Evan said. I'll do it. Before I could object, the silken threads around my body disintegrated, giving me control once again. The glowing feather imprinted onto the skin over my heart, burning into stardust. Evan set me down and slipped his hand into mine. He leaned his forehead into my ear. Don't worry, remember what I promised all those years ago? I'll be your sword, a broken bar. A broken bar and shield. I blinked away the tears as the pain stitched itself onto my skin. Ma Urigan raised a hand. A ball of purple fire flew from her palm, striking Evan in the back of the head. With a shout, Evan fell forward and toppled over me onto the ground. Evan, I shook him, then turned to Ma Urigan. What did you do to him? She shrugged. Nothing. I simply collected my payment, she said through a grin. I grabbed his shoulders. Evan, wake up, say something. Evan pressed a hand against his head and groaned. You're alright. I pulled him into a hug. Are you okay? Yeah, I think so, he said. His eyes darted from Ma Urigan, then around the Fade before landing back to me. I just have a broken bar. Some questions. A knot formed in my belly. Of course. What is it? Who am I? Where are we? And who are you?